sure it was on. So what are we talking about? We're talking about sources of stress. Stresses at work. Almost everyone experiences work-related stress at some point. I don't, because if they give me a hard time, I'll just quit. I can retire. I can retire at any time. Yeah, I know. Work-related stress may be one of the most preventable health hazards that we have. You don't have to. This morning, everybody was all upset because they couldn't get the door unlocked at the fob. Of course, I showed up and froze. No, I got it. I got the door, but everybody was all tense and of course it was 0 degrees outside. I don't know.
What was wrong with the door?
It was frozen for one thing. You have to, in order to unlock it, you have to hit it with your shoulder, and then you have to put the key in the right position and bang on it with your shoulder, and then move the handle down. Anyway, I've done it over and over again.
Okay.
But it was especially bad this morning because it was cold. It was 0 degrees this morning. So yeah. So it froze. My car doors froze this morning, and I had to hit it.
Are you used to this type of temperature?
Oh yeah. This kind of stuff happens all the time. If it's warmer on the inside than it is on the outside, it creates condensation. And the condensation is where the two temperatures meet. Well, that's right there at the door. So sometimes you have to break that ice mass with your shoulder in order to get something open. Yeah, I'm used to those kinds. Work stress can be debilitating, of course. A Canadian study in 2010 found that people who perceived higher levels of work stress had higher odds of being treated for emotional problems, mental health problems, mood disorders, and anxiety disorders. This was a Canadian study in 2010, which is very logical. I mean, if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. So if you're having problems at work, then all of these things are a possibility. People are changing jobs more now than they ever have in the past. The average worker will change jobs 10 to 15 times in a typical work career, and I've changed jobs 17 times, mainly because of my wife, not because I got fired. I've only been fired once. Between 18 and 27, the average worker in the United States will hold 8 jobs, and that's mainly because when they're 18 years old, of course, they're just entry-level jobs. And then you go to college and you get a college education, and you find one job and then you change to another job. 8 jobs is a lot. Potentially that means that's Burger King, Wendy's, McDonald's, you just keep bouncing from one place to the other. Not here, of course, you only have Burger King.
There's internships as well.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, and you're looking for the perfect job. And millennials aren't really very good at holding jobs. And it's not the fact that they have a problem holding jobs. They just keep thinking that there's something better out there. Everybody wants to be a rock star and make millions and millions of dollars. They just want to make money. They want to be successful and buy a big house and have a BMW or whatever. College-educated workers will change jobs more frequently than less educated workers. And that's because they can, and people are looking for them. Changing jobs can be stressful. One study found that people who changed jobs frequently before age 36 had more health problems at age 42. Hasn't been my problem. I don't really have that many health problems. Even though I keep changing jobs, I keep moving, so I change jobs. The hardest part for me is leaving a job that I'm really good at and that I'm having a really good time, and then all of a sudden my wife gets orders, and so I had to take off. And that was tough. That was really tough. I was teaching at Mississippi University for Women. Oh, it was so nice. And we had this great house, and of course she immediately finds another job. So the guy that I was working with, the guy that was in charge of the department, begged me to stay, said divorce your wife, that kind of stuff. No.
Would you go back?
To Mississippi University for Women. When I was looking for this job, they had a job, and I applied for it, and I didn't get it. But would I go back to Mississippi? Yeah, it was pretty nice down there. And they had a problem that I was trying to deal with. They had a racial problem. And of course, all the black students would come to my office because I talked to them like they were human. Okay. And other instructors didn't. So they kind of liked me. So I was in the middle of a revolution taking place down there.
What year was this?
1995. 1995 through 1997.
I think we picked that up about you on your first day here.
Oh, really? Yeah, there's something wrong with me, obviously.
He sees me.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, even people from the north going down to the south, you would think that they would have different ideas. But a lot of people, instead of trying to change people's way of looking at things, they accept the ideas of the people around them. So whereas the white people born in the South have a degree of racism about them, these individuals wanted to be just like the people around them so that they didn't, knock heads with them. But I didn't care because I've been in the military, so I'm used to not being like the people I'm around. So, it's like moving to Texas and wearing cowboy boots. A lot of people would do that. They would dress like the people around them so they would be more acceptable to the people around them. But I've never done that. My wife's from Georgia. Older workers find job change more stressful. The loss of seniority, of course, often means a lower salary and a loss of respect. I was thinking about this morning when I was going over my notes. When I first got here, of course, Sarah hired me. Sarah's younger than my children now. I have children older than Sarah. I'd also taught on an Indian reservation at a tribal college for 10 years. So I kind of knew what the hell was going on. I had taught on that reservation longer than Sarah had been teaching. So it was really hard for me. She came up with a program, and I saw needs that we had, things that we needed to change. I'm old as dirt. I have a lot of experience, and I couldn't get her to change her mind. She just wouldn't. But eventually, of course, everything worked out.
Before when she was recruiting for this program, she told us a little bit about you.
Oh, really?
She met a perfect gentleman.
I am.
We were waiting for about 4 months. So this guy's gonna show up pretty soon. So,
Perfect
you showed us that
person.
way.
She was right. I am. No.
Very knowledgeable.
Very knowledgeable.
You guys gonna have fun.
And that's all that's important.
Yeah, she told us about the past experience with on another reservation.
Where I got fired.
She told us that part.
Well, she may not have known that by that time. I had to tell her before I came. I didn't want her to be surprised. The lady that's in charge of AHEC, you guys ever heard of AHEC? The one that's in charge of scholarships at AHEC is the lady that fired me at my other college.
Oh, I should
I
mention
know.
you.
So don't mention my name.
The reason why I'm a psychologist is because of Bruce Bradway.
No, don't say that. Yeah, you'll lose any funding that you possibly can get. Who was the lady that came to visit us? Bonnie Durant. Remember when Bonnie came? Okay. So we're having this conversation. Bonnie keeps talking about research. We need to do all this research. Of course, I can't do any research here. I signed a sheet I signed a contract saying that I wouldn't do any research. But Bonnie's trying to get me to do research, and she's talking to me about this, and she wants me to do this, and she wants me to do that. And I said, I can't do that, I can't do that. And finally I told her, after everything was over with, I told her that I can't do research. I signed a contract that said I wouldn't do any research. And she said, oh, that's silly. And then I told her what happened up in Montana and the fact that this lady had fired me. And when she heard the name, she took off. I mean, it was like, all of a sudden, I didn't exist anymore. The door shut, the window went down, and she was gone. This lady has that kind of power. I mean, it's really kind of interesting. Anyway, so I'm not going to give you her name, but if you ever interact with somebody from AHEC, and just don't mention my name, because...
I do like to step on toes, though.
Well,
Just kidding. No, I'm
I'll
just
tell
kidding.
you. I'll tell you.
I'm
afterwards.
just kidding.
So how was the road from Gallup? I mean, from Window Rock, from Crystal, from wherever the hell.
It's
Ford to Farm.
passable.
Passable.
Yeah.
So you drove how fast?
40.
Okay.
So you can drive 80.
I can drive.
I'm just
Older workers. So I don't really have any, well, I did have a problem with this because she wouldn't listen to anything that I said. And so she would say things like, let's see, what was that? How did that argument go? I would say something like, well, I have 25 years teaching experience. And she would say, yeah, but I went to Northwestern or something like that. Yeah, I have a PhD from Northwestern. That's the way the argument would go. And eventually we worked everything out. I thought this was too research heavy. Your program was too research heavy. I think it's still a little bit too research. And I think you need more counseling classes. And that's what I told her. We needed more counseling classes. And actually, we just added a counseling class. And if we can add that human sexuality class, that's going to be a third. That's going to be a third class. But we'll see what happens. I know. I keep knocking heads with people. I don't know. Sue doesn't want that class. Doesn't want me to teach that class. So we'll see what happens. So what does she teach it? Why do I have to teach that class? Why am I the one that always has to get in trouble? Older workers may lack job skills that didn't even exist when they trained to work. I can't type. I type with 2 fingers. My middle fingers. I know I had a sore on this finger. I could barely type. And then I lost a fingernail on this one. Don't cry. Many employers are reluctant to hire older workers, of course, and mainly it's because they don't have the computer skills that other people have. When I was going to college, they didn't have computers, my undergraduate years. Then I got into the military. Of course, the military had all the best computers you could possibly imagine. They also had GPS that you guys have just discovered. Yeah, we had it back in the 70s, but it was we used it for targeting missiles. Which I never targeted anyway. Although age discrimination is illegal, it's still fairly common out there. Old farts have a hard time finding work. Having to relocate for a new job is disruptive to a worker's social network, of course. I've got friends. I actually don't have friends. And I keep telling you guys, I don't have any friends. Of course, Marius is my friend, but he's only here like Monday and Tuesday. One of the reasons that I don't find somebody to hang around with is because I've moved. Every time I go someplace, I move like 2 or 3 years later. So what's the use, you know? And I do have friends. One of them just died, you know, and I keep telling you about that guy that just died, that Nazi that just died. Holland in 1997, in his theory of PersonEnvironment Congruence, found that when jobs fit people's personalities, they are happier. Now, this is in 1997. That was 22 years ago. So maybe this isn't viable anymore. I mean, it was 22 years ago. When did the internet start? Well, 1993. So this is only 4 years after the internet started. Maybe things have changed. Maybe things have changed a great deal since the internet has expanded and exploded, and now you can work at home. You know, there's a lot of different aspects that are completely different. And that's why I keep telling you, things are changing, and they're changing very rapidly. So you've got to keep your eyes open. We don't know what's down the road. We don't know what crazy stuff is going to happen. If they legalize marijuana, all bets are off. Marijuana is going to change everything. Crystal meth changed everything. Crack cocaine changed everything. You know, and we don't know what drugs are down the pike. Fentanyl. Who would? That kills people. I mean, it's nuts. Why are people doing these things? Maybe all of this stuff will change people. Crystal meth did. People get meth head for 18 months after they stop using meth. It makes you stupid. It destroys your brain cells. What's marijuana going to do? Well, it's going to do the same thing. Not as bad as meth, but I mean, it's going to change people's memories. It's going to change the way they interact. We're going to have a lot more angry people. When you're stoned, of course, you act one way. When you're off of marijuana, you're grouchier. You're going to be grouchier. So we don't know what's going to happen. And you guys are the ones that are going to have to deal with this, not me. I'm going to be dead or retired. What's the difference? So these are the personalities that he looked at. If you can find a job that fits your personality, then you're going to be happier. People that are realistic, these are individuals that try to get things done. These people are doers. These are realists. Of course, they're the ones that have everything all planned out, the realistic individuals. Investigative people that like to look into things, people that like to research things. These are the thinkers. They're the innovators. They're the ones that come up with new ideas. The investigative people. Artistic people that can draw, people that can write really well. These are the creators. They are the ones that come up with the new ideas. You don't have to be the person that discovers the next big mental illness. You don't have to be that person. You just have to recognize when you see it, that you're seeing something that's not the same as it was before. Remember, we keep having these diseases. These diseases keep integrating themselves into our society, and there are doctors that want everything to be exactly the same as the last guy that they saw, so they don't recognize the HIV, they don't recognize the Ebola virus, they don't recognize the H1N1 flu, because they want it to be the same as everything else. They want to treat everything exactly the same. So they're blind to this stuff. That was rough. They're blind to it, and they miss it. And so all of a sudden we find out we've had 50 cases of this stuff and nobody said anything. Why? Because the doctor wasn't that type of a thinker. He wasn't a thinker. He didn't see outside the box. He wanted everything to be within that box. We have obsessive compulsive people who make really good doctors as long as they see the same thing over and over and over again. But if something new comes in, they don't recognize it. So that's the people that we have to be in order to see the next mental illness. And you're going to see different things here on the reservation. Things may change. Wilson's got one idea. Avery's got another idea. Emery's got another idea. We've got Travis has another idea. So who's right? Well, obviously it's Travis. Because he's the youngest of all of them. And he's not blinded by what has happened in the past. He's not, they have only seen this happening. So when something new happens, they don't recognize it. But he's looking for something new. All of this stuff is new to him. And he's more open to new experiences because he's younger. So, social people, people that are outgoing, they're extroverts. These people tend to be helpers. Enterprising individuals, they are the ones that persuade people. One of the reasons we elected Donald Trump is because he's an enterprising person. Unfortunately, the way he's enterprising is making money, and He focuses on money. Money's very important to him. And he persuades people. He just thinks that he can tell them any damn thing and they'll believe it. And he's right. Some people don't even question him. They just accept what he says. He's a persuader, and it works. We've never had a president like this before. You may not have him much longer. We don't know what's going to happen. The conventional individual tends to be the organizer. And it's important to have all of these individuals in your organization, because you need somebody who's a doer, you need somebody that's a thinker, you need somebody that's a creator, you need people that are helpers, you need persuaders, and you need organizers. You need these people in your organization. So just because you're not the same as somebody else, Sarah and I are very, very different. Sue is very different from the rest of us. She's a very extroverted social person. She's far more extroverted than I am. She's teaching 498 or 499. I'm teaching 497. I couldn't teach what she's teaching. She makes contact with people. She knows people. She's a networker. You know, you guys are the only people that I know. I mean, if I had her job to teach that class, and I told her this, I couldn't do that. You know, she's making contact with behavioral health, with, I couldn't do that. I'm just not that kind of person. It embarrasses me. I need to see you and talk to you a little bit before I figure out who you are. But she just goes right up to people and shakes their hand. That's the kind of person she is. So she's really good at that job. She's better at teaching that class than I would be. Sarah's good at research, and she's good at whichever one that is. I'm 499 or 498. I'm okay with 497 because those are the people that are teaching. Those are the people that are going to write a paper, and they're doing individual research. So I'm okay with that, but I couldn't do either Sarah's job or Sue's job. I couldn't teach research methods. I couldn't teach statistics, and both of those guys are able to do that. Anyway, so we need everybody. People are happier in their jobs when they feel accepted, when they feel liked, when they feel included, if there are prospects of achievement in their job, their status is protected. This is really important, and they are being shown respect by other individuals. And of course, at one point, when Sarah and I were arguing about things, I didn't feel respected by her. It was tough coming to work. Well, it's tough being around Sarah at that point. But now we get along okay, because she's in Tuba City. If she were here, we'd probably be knocking heads, and that's okay. She's a different person than I am. This department needs the two of us. It's perfect that the two of us are in this department. If she hired other people that were like her, it would be a completely different program. If she had hired another researcher, well, she did, but Sue's extroverted, and Sarah is introverted, very introverted. She really is. Oh, geez, we're doing a psychological profile. Sarah now, wait a minute. No, this is good. We need to read these kinds of things. You need to see who we are, the three of us. And we're different. And it works for us so far. And the program has changed. We have expanded it. When I first mentioned that to Sarah, she didn't want to do it at all. She just shut me down right away. You just want to change the program. You want to make it like you. No, this is what they need. And the next, and that was in the spring, and by the next fall, she had realized that I was right. I know, and she changed things. So that's why the checklist has changed, because she wants to help you guys. At first, she just wanted to put the program together, and she's the one who did it. Anyway, this is what you need. You need to feel accepted, liked, included, There needs to be a level of achievement. You need to feel protected in who you are, and you need to be shown respect. Work overload is when people who feel that they have too much, have to work too long and too hard at too many tasks, feel more stressed and have poor health habits than other individuals. We had a crisis. You probably don't remember, what was his name? No, I can't even remember. Chris Jones was teaching over at Tuba City, and he quit. He quit on a Friday before classes started on Monday. He was going to teach 5 classes. So we had to do something with, either we dumped those kids that he was going to teach, or we had to somehow integrate them into our classes. And what we did, we created online classes for those students, and we were able to pick them all up. Nobody didn't get the classes that they needed. But in order to do that, Sarah and I had to work overloads. I had 9 classes and she had 7. I was teaching 9 classes that semester, she was teaching 7. It's a lot of kids. I had over 200 students. That was a lot. And I was teaching 9 classes. I know. I was grading like all the time, like constantly. And I'm lazy. I don't like to grade. Anyway, we made it. We did it. We kicked ass that semester. We picked everybody up, and not everybody passed, but at least we did it. But we were in a real serious situation. If we didn't have health, both of us are runners, both of us are walkers, both Sarah and I have healthy habits, so neither of us suffered from that, but we were pretty burned out by the end of the semester, if I remember correctly. These individuals experience more accidents and more health problems. In Japan, overload often leads to death. It's known as karoshi. They have a name for it. These people work themselves to death and they will die at their desks. And that's known as karoshi. It's a great compliment to the organization if you die at your desk, as heart attacks or whatever. I know it's stupid. And of course they work insane hours. They work for free. They will work overtime and they won't get paid for it. And that's okay as far as they're concerned. It shows their dedication to the organization. And then they die, and it's called corrosion. Workers who volunteer for overtime tend to be more satisfied with work than workers who are required to work overtime. And you can think of the military. When we drafted people into the military and sent them overseas into combat, these were the individuals that suffered more from PTSD. They had PTSD. They had no control over what was happening to them. So if they are assigned overload, if they have to work more hours than they're supposed to, then it's more stressful for them than if they volunteer to work an overload. Then let me tell you something about overload pay. I've done this a lot. I usually do whatever I can to help. But the problem is that you get time and a half. That sounds like more money, doesn't it? Turns out that it's not more money. And the reason it's not more money is because they tax you at a different level when you work overload. So you don't get any more money. You actually get about the same amount of money. So despite the fact that you're thinking, well, I make $10 an hour, now I'm making $15 an hour for these 6 hours that I'm going to work, and then you get your paycheck and you realize, wait a minute, they took more money, more taxes out for my overload. Yeah, that's the way it works. It really is upsetting. Role overload is a problem associated with juggling multiple roles simultaneously. This usually happens with women who have to take care of the family as well as work their jobs. A large study in Canada showed that work-related stress was equal parts the stress created by the job and the stress of the family, especially if the children were younger than 5. Little guys demand attention. They want attention. They just want you to watch them. Mom, watch! And so she's coloring the coloring book. Do I have to watch you do that? Yes, of course you do. And if you don't watch her, what does she do? All of a sudden she hollers outside the line. Or she just does one of these with the calling wheel. Sorry, maybe your kid is different than my two kids were. But they were looking for attention. And of course my first wife left when my son was 9 months old, my daughter was like 2.5. Well, she was about 3 years old at the time. So I had two little guys at the same time, and I did this for 5 years. It was a tough gig. It was rough because I was in the military at the time, so I was working 12-hour days. You know how military is. You're theirs for 24/7, so you really don't have much choice. This is especially true for women who may feel pulled in two directions by their career and by their biological needs to be a parent. Role overload, golly, okay. Scarcity hypothesis purports that because time is limited, multiple roles are damaging for the select individual. Enhancement hypothesis states that the benefits of meaningful work in enhancing self-esteem outweighs the costs. So despite the fact that you're doing 3 or 4 things at a time, you're still able to get her done. A study by Lundberg, Marburg, and Frankenhauser, of course it was done in Germany, or maybe it was done in Sweden. In 1994, found that in a childless home, women and men worked on average 60 hours a week. That's work at home and work on their job. When they added 3 children to the mix, women's workload increased to 90 hours, but men's work hours stayed the same. Now remember, this is in Europe, not in the United States. Men help more in the United States than they do in Europe. Men are more traditional over in Europe, in Sweden, in Germany, in France, in England. They tend to be more traditional. They're really bad in Russia. Russian men will not lift a finger to do any housework whatsoever. That's why they live with their mothers if they don't live with their wives. Their wives do all the work. Even if the wife works, even if the guy doesn't work at all, he still won't do any housework. That's woman's work. So he won't clean the house, he won't cook the meals, he won't do anything. He won't lift a finger. While women who are single parents suffer more stress and are at more risk for health problems, Horschild in 1997 found that both men and women who balanced vocational, marital, and parental roles were healthier and happier, mainly because they had somebody to interact with. And this is somebody that they had to interact with, so they didn't have a choice. One of the problems that some women have after they give birth is postpartum depression. And part of the problem is that they don't have anybody helping them. They don't have anybody to interact with, except for the baby, if that's part of their culture. When my grandson was born, I realized this might be a problem for my daughter. I think I told you this story. So as soon as the baby was born in July, I went down and I lived with her to help take care of the baby, because the baby daddy was a swine. He was a jerk. And I knew he wasn't going to be around for very long, and he wasn't. He just took off. But I realized that if she had to take care of that kid by herself, that she was going to suffer with it. So somebody needed to help. This is the way it used to be. And 150 years ago, there was always somebody that would come and help take care of the baby, help the woman take care of the baby, to cook and to make things a little bit easier. And they stuck around for kind of a long time, for about a year and a half. It was usually a maiden aunt. It was an aunt that had never had babies, who didn't have anything else to do. She'd come and she would help. And this is the way it used to be. I don't know how it works in your culture. Do you have somebody, does grandma come over and help? Is that the way it works? Yes? Travis tells me. That's it. Grandma comes over, is it aunt? Is it an auntie or something?
Grandma.
Grandma comes over, okay. Grandma loves babies. She wants to hold the baby all the time. And that's okay. She can spoil that kid all she wants. And that's good. My mother loved babies. So she was always there. But it's supposed to be the maternal grandmother, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it the wife's mother that comes over? Isn't it? It's not the father's mother. No, of course not. No. They have to help take care of the kid. This study was replicated by Milky and Peltola in 1999. That people were happier if they had all these things going on at the same time. They were parents, they were husbands and wives, and they had a job. Burnout is a job-related state of physical and psychological exhaustion. Jobs that involve responsibility for other people appear to have higher levels of burnout. Healthcare workers, dentists, paramedics, air traffic controllers, firefighters, law enforcement personnel. If you look at law enforcement personnel, I think the average number of marriages is 3. They have a really hard time staying married, and it's because they bring their work home with them. Sometimes they marry people that they interact with, which is either other police people or criminals that they've arrested, which is a huge, huge mistake. So you can see that these individuals, especially law enforcement personnel, have a real serious problem. I was a healthcare worker. It's a very, very stressful job. I worked in the emergency room. Even more stressful. Everything is ASAP and STAT. STAT means right away, and ASAP means as soon as possible. So all the work that I did, I had to do as fast as I possibly could, and I had to do everything very, very accurately. If I did anything inaccurately, somebody died. If I made a mistake, somebody died. If I told them that somebody who's diabetic wasn't diabetic, and they didn't give them insulin, then they died. If I told them that somebody was diabetic who wasn't diabetic, and they gave them insulin, they'd go into insulin shock and die. Okay. So I had to do everything perfect the first time, and as quickly as I possibly could. Highly stressful job. Very, very stressful job. I loved it. I loved it. It was great. I had a wonderful time. I had the best time in the world. Just think of all those lives I saved. I hardly ever killed anybody. No, can't even think of it. Well, I can think of one person. I won't tell you that story. See, I'm not going to tell you my bad stories. 1/3 of nurses report stress-related symptoms. There's a reason for this. Some people are they don't have the personality for this kind of a job. You got to be a little bit mean, a little bit callous, and of course you can't be too mean, you can't be too callous. You got to be right there on the cusp. Sometimes you have a bad day and you're meaner to people than you probably should be. Some nurses are just too sympathetic. They feel sorry for their patients, and you can't do that. Because even though I feel sorry for you, I've got to go to the next room and I've got to take care of you. Well, if I'm feeling sad about what happened to you, then I'm not going to be able to take care of you properly. And that's the way it works. So you got to be just a little bit, callous, I guess is the word. And some people can't handle that. I learned that from my mom, because my mom was a nurse and she was probably the meanest lady the world has ever created, but she was able to go from one place to another, and she liked to tell the story about we worked in a blue-collar town, so there were a lot of people that drank, and they drank on Friday nights because that's when they got paid. So people would come in, they'd get drunk, and they'd have an automobile accident, and pieces would be missing or whatever, and of course, they're drunk, and some drunk people are really hard to talk to and to convince that they've got a problem. Sometimes they can't feel what's going on. She had this one guy that his arm was just hanging there. And he came in, and of course they're trying to take care of him, and he's bleeding, and the guy, they lay him down on the gurney, and he's bleeding all over the place, and he keeps getting up and trying to walk out to go get another drink, that kind of a thing. So my mother, who's all of 4'8", I mean, she was like this tall, and she was, well, I can't talk about that. She was a full-figured woman, okay? She was chesty, okay? But she was a little short thing. Anyway, so she yells at this guy, and she gets this edge in her voice, and she says, "You don't move again! Lay down!" I know, this little 4'8" lady that looks like a kid. Anyway, so she got the guy to lay down, and they were able to put his arm back on. Of course, it came off later. That's a sad part of the story. Anyway, she kept telling us about that story, and my sister's listening to this story, and all she can think about is, oh, that poor man and his poor arm. And of course, the point of the story was sometimes you got to tell people to do what is best for them. That was the point of my mother's story. That's what I got out of it. So when I started working in medicine, I used that story over and over and over again to be able to deal with people that were in really bad shape. Because, I mean, you got to do that. Because I can't worry about her when I'm taking care of her. I just can't do that. I've got to, I've got to encapsulate this problem here, and so now I have to focus 100% on her. Because if I'm thinking about her, I'm going to deal with you. Anyway, that's what I got out of it. My sister still to this day cries about that guy that lost his arm. Oh, shit. Well, it was his fault. He kept getting up off the gurney. And of course, every time he got up, the arm got worse and worse and worse. Okay, tore more and more ligaments. Anyway, eventually he lost his arm. So these are the people that suffer the most. One study showed that doctors suffer stress-related problems at twice the rate of nurses. So if 1/3 of nurses have stress-related problems, that's what? 4/6, or no, it's not 4/6, it's 3/6. Half of doctors have that problem. Symptoms of burnout include feelings of mental exhaustion, feelings of physical exhaustion, absenteeism, high job turnover, abnormal stress hormone levels, increased headaches, increase in backaches, increase in depression, and shortness of temper. And these are problems that these people have. Burnout. I went to college with a lot of people that became doctors, and some of them didn't have a personality of doctors, and either they died young, or they moved out of the job, or they figured out how to do it, and they've done it for a really long time. I have a friend, I can show you a picture. I have a friend that I ran track with. Yeah, this is him right here. He became an he's an eye, ear, nose, and throat doctor. I'm sorry. I keep trying to get a hold of him so I can send him this picture. He still looks like this. It's so irritating. I'm old as dirt, and this guy still looks like he's...
Is that you in the background?
I just exchanged the baton with him. This is a mile relay. That's Brad. You can see I'm like this far off the ground. But he was like 6'4" or something. Here I am popping up on the ground. I look taller than Brad. He's all bent over. Anyway, Brad's a eye, ear, nose, and throat doctor. He just changed jobs. He's like 68 years old. He just changed jobs. But that's the kind of person he is. He can handle this stuff, and he's been handling it for 40 years. That's the kind of guy he is. Well, you don't need to look at me. I'm dead there. I just ran a quarter mile. We won the race, by the way. We did win the race. I was always first, and he was second. Come on, there we go. Anyway, so burnout. A lot of them are dead. I mean, they have died. They did things like became alcoholics. They became not drunks, they became drug addicts. They took Demerol, their own stuff, they're taking their own drugs. And these people died. They just couldn't handle it. But Brad, of course, has just changed jobs. That's how resilient this individual is. Anyone feels more stress if they have little or no control over a situation. We seem to keep finding this out. We found it out about PTSD. Now we're finding it out about burnout. Control is very important. Now this gets to be a problem because how in the world do you give people control? How do you allow them autonomy? If somebody's working for you, can you possibly let them do it themselves? Or do you have to stay on top of it? Yeah, see, this is in the kitchen. I mean, there are some people that are good at their job. They're good cooks. So you don't have to worry about those guys, right? But you have other individuals that
Yeah, they like to take shortcuts.
Exactly.
Or, they just don't want to go through the whole process.
And cooking is one of those jobs where you have to prepare today for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the food is not as good.
Right.
So you have to prepare it today. And sometimes you actually do the cooking today and then serve it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And some food tastes better if you let it sit and blend, like stews and soups and whatnot. They're always better the second day than they were the first day. First day you get flavor of each vegetable, but the next day everything tastes kind of the same. It's all blended together. Anyway, okay. So the question is control, isn't it? So we know that individuals that have no control, those people that you have to stay on top of, these are the individuals that suffer from burnout more than anybody else. It was the same way in Vietnam. Well, it was the same way in the military. The person that you had to stay on top of is the guy that suffers from PTSD today. The guy that you knew was always going to do the right thing probably became an NCO later because, of course, he was able to do his own work without having anybody stand on top of him. And he's the one that doesn't have PTSD nearly as bad. Because they're self-motivated, they're under control, you don't have to watch them. You know that if you tell them to paint all the rocks white, that they'll paint all the rocks white. Some of those guys you have to watch them paint the rocks in order for them to paint the rocks. Otherwise they sit there and bellyache about having to paint the rocks. Okay. This is a real famous thing they do in the Army. They paint the rocks for some reason. Research by Frankenhauser with Scandinavian sawmill workers in 1975 showed that the less control the workers felt, the more likely they were to suffer from high-stress hormones, high blood pressure, more headaches, more gastrointestinal problems, such as ulcers. So if these were people that were relatively self-motivated, and you could give them control of their own job, and they would get the job done. These are the individuals that didn't have a problem. The one that you had to go and check on all the time, who seemed to be taking more breaks than they were supposed to take, these are the individuals that had all these problems. These are potentially people that have jobs that they don't really like. I've never had a job. I've never worked a day in my life. I've always enjoyed everything that I've done, which makes it not a job. Always make it a game. I worked in a factory one time, making pumps and parts, automotive pumps and parts. What a shitty job that was. No, I tried to make as many parts as I possibly could. It was a game for me. And everybody got irritated with me because I was doing too much work. If I did that much work, then they would have to do that much work. So they got pissed off because I was making all these parts. So here I am, I'm manufacturing all these parts, and all of a sudden I've run out of pieces. I can't make any more because they are supplying me as slowly as they possibly can. because I'm making too many parts. I'm making everybody else look bad. But that was the game I played. And I had a great time over there, except I kept getting in trouble with people. They would send me on lunch break. You know, lunch was supposed to be 30 minutes. They'd send me on lunch for an hour and a half so that they could build up a pile of stuff for me to do. It was horrible. So what did I do? I read. When studies were done in England to measure control and stress-related illness, they found similar results to the Scandinavian study. But when the same study was done in Japan, they found that the less control the workers had, the lower the stress. What? Wait a minute. In Scandinavia, in Sweden, and in Norway, when the individual had less control, they suffered from all these problems. But then you take the whole thing to Japan, and you find out the less control they have, the less stress it is for them. Now, what is the hell is the difference between people in Sweden and Norway and people in Japan? What's the difference? Why are they so different? What's wrong with people in Scandinavia or what's wrong with people in Japan? Something's going on. We're psychologists. We need to figure out what's going on. If we go to Japan and we have somebody that's suffering from burnout, we need to treat them differently than if we go to Sweden or Norway and treat somebody for burnout. Now, the people in Sweden and Norway are more like people in the United States. We know this because we see the results coming out of the military. The more control you have, the less problem you have with burnout. But in Japan, it's the very opposite. The more control you have, the more you suffer from stress. The less control you have, why? What's the difference? Who's right and who's wrong? Sadly, both are right. I mean, it's a society, it's a culture. So can I say that your culture is wrong? Well, I shouldn't. So what's the difference between the Japanese and the Scandinavians?
Population.
Are there more people in? Actually, there's about the same in both places. They're both. It's cold. It's cold in Sweden. Maybe that. I'm sorry?
The environment,
The environment?
or it's technology? Technology, maybe.
Are the Japanese just like the people in Norway?
No.
What's wrong? What's the difference?
Japanese more live like within Norway, they're more outer. More social.
Okay. So what we have in Japan are people who are collectivistic, who have to do everything that everybody else does. So they're used to this type of behavior. And what we have in Norway and Sweden are people that are individualistic, like we are in the United States. So the less control they have, the less autonomy they have, the more stress that they feel. In Japan, if you give them responsibility, it's more stressful for them. But in Sweden, where they're individualistic, they seek autonomy. In Japan, they don't seek autonomy. In Japan, they want to be like everybody else. In Japan, if you're different, then they make you the same. If you live in Chinli and you wear red clothes, no, I'm just kidding. Nobody in Chinli wears red clothes. If you don't have a black jacket on, you're going to Chinli later, right? Right, Travis? Yeah. You fit right in. Don't worry about it. You fit right in. Walk around at night when it's so dark. It's perfect. Drives me crazy. I can't go to Chinli at night. I can't see people. When they're looking for a ride, they're walking out into the road with their phone on. And all you can see is their gym shoes. And sometimes it's just the sole of their gym shoes. Hopefully they've got reflectors on their shoes. Individuals who feel powerless but are responsible for production levels, such as middle managers, may feel crushing stress. They're getting it from both ends. They're getting all the complaints from the people that work for them, and they're getting all of the pressure from their bosses. So it's the middle managers that suffer the most. Other situations that cause increased stress include role ambiguity or conflict, when a worker isn't sure how the performance is being evaluated. And that kind of happened here. This happened to me when I was working at Ashford. At Ashford, they told us, well, apply to get to increase your status, to increase your rank. You can be an associate professor. And so we did. We all applied for this thing. And then they had secret criteria that we didn't know about. They didn't tell us about it. And so none of us got it. They advanced 3 people out of like 250. They advanced 3 people. We're going, what the hell happened? You know, I've been teaching for 25 years. What's wrong with my application? What was wrong with my application? They had the secret criteria. You had to be a member of their PAC. You know what a PAC is? Political Action Committee. Okay. You had to be a member of their PAC, and you had to have research. You had to do research. Well, they didn't say that before. So the 3 people that were actually given a raise were the individuals that had those 2 criteria. Shift work, workers at different times of the day, which tends to disrupt family life and biological rhythms. Has anybody ever worked a graveyard shift? They call it the graveyard for a reason. I work graveyard shift in the lab, where we're the ones that check the people into the morgue. That's when everybody dies, between 12 o'clock at night and 8 o'clock in the morning. That's when everybody dies. Why would people die between 12 o'clock and 8 o'clock? Why would they die then? They don't die at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, damn it. I've got this hospital full of people. There's like 250 beds. And they get nobody in the morgue, I mean, all day long. And the evening shift doesn't get anybody in the morgue. Of course, that's supper time. Nobody's going to die during supper time. So it's 12 o'clock. Everybody's supposed to be asleep. What's going on? Why is everybody dying between 12 and 8?
So they're alone.
They are alone, that's for sure. I guess they could be more depressed since they're all alone.
Or under the influence.
They just got their pills at 12 o'clock. Maybe they overdosed it. Or maybe their blood pressure is the lowest between 8
Sounds
o'clock.
like the time when it's leisure time, I think.
They're supposed to be asleep.
It's like nothing going on scheduled.
People die in their sleep. That's the way it works. Your blood pressure goes down. So if you've got a problem and you're having a hard time holding on, you don't want to go to sleep, because if you go to sleep, you might die. You've never been in this situation, but I have. I ruptured my spleen. I kept going into the hospital, and they kept telling me it was something else. So I was getting ready for work, and I lifted my arm up like this, and it popped that clot I had. So I was bleeding in my thorax. But when I lifted my arm up, it started bleeding again. It started hemorrhaging. And I knew it. I could feel it. And I'd been into the doctor, and the doctor told me nothing. You know how doctors are. It's always what they want it to be. Oh, it looks like you have a bruised rib. And it popped, and I could feel myself bleeding. And I just laid down, and I said, well, I may not wake up from this. And I knew I might bleed to death. So I just laid down, and I didn't die, okay? I didn't bleed to death. It clotted again, so I was okay. But I knew it. I could feel it. And I didn't want to die. Well, I guess but at that point I was too tired of yelling at doctors. They're so damn stupid. Anyway, job loss, of course, can be very stressful. And as I told you before, they fired me, and 10 days later I had a heart attack. It's the first time I'd ever been fired before. I was teaching at the most wonderful school I had ever, and I thought I was going to be there forever. I was a member of the community. I was on 3 powwow committees. They loved me there. And they fired me. And people were upset. I mean, my students were all upset. The whole student body, they got that lady fired. She would get up to talk, and they would boo her, and they would yell at her and scream at her, and so she couldn't stand up and talk before the student body. They had to get rid of her, or she left. Anyway, so they lost. She fired me, and then they lost her because she couldn't work there anymore. Anyway, it was. I mean, and I really liked that job, and they were really sweet people. I thought I was going to live in Montana forever. I was planning. I had written my will, and I said I want my ashes split in 5 parts, and I want one of the parts to go on that reservation, to be spread on that reservation, which you can't do. But I had a friend I knew that would do it. Okay.
Do it here.
Yeah. Well, Travis will do it.
I put it in chili.
Everything in chili is brown. You're going to have these white ashes floating around. What is that white stuff going over? Lack of fairness and inadequate career advancement, of course, is another problem. I love this picture. This is a great picture. Social relationships are important throughout your lifespan. Social relationships have been shown to enhance immune functioning. Loneliness and relationship stress leads to immunosuppression. And here it is. She has left him. And see, she's torn it. Well, no, his heart's still there, isn't it? Okay. Anyway, but that's all that's there. I mean, that's what a broken heart looks like.
He doesn't feel whole.
Because she's gone. And look, she's got a razor blade in her hand. What a great picture that is. Okay, so when you lose somebody, you feel depressed. You feel like a piece of you has disappeared, and you become immunosuppressed. So you're more likely to die from a heart attack. You're more likely to develop cancer if somebody leaves you. If your relationship breaks up, and this doesn't have to be a significant other. I mean, it doesn't have to be a spouse. It can be just a boyfriend, girlfriend. One of the problems we had up north was people committing suicide after their girlfriend left. It was usually the guy that committed suicide. He was the one that, he was much better at it than she was. She would take pills, but not quite enough to kill herself, but enough to have to go to the hospital, that kind of deal. And he'd hang himself. Of course, that's real hard to come back from. Or shoot himself. You can't take that bullet back. It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, this is a really serious problem. This is how people feel when they lose a significant other. And I've been divorced twice. And both times I felt this way. The first time I went down to 117 pounds. I weigh 185 right now. At the time I weighed about 145. And I went down to 117 pounds the first time I got a divorce. Second time, not so bad. I only went down to 119 pounds. Okay, I was feeling that bad.
I think you see this in some couples too, when one passes away.
Right, the other one dies.
Yeah, 2 years later, or a year later.
A week later, or a month later, or 2 months later. We thought that was going to happen with my mom and dad. My mom and dad were real close. I don't think that she ever left. Whenever he went someplace, he always kissed her goodbye. And when he came back, he always kissed her hello. That's the kind of relationship they had. And they did this for, 60 years. And then he died, and everybody thought my mom was going to die. But she hung on for, 5 or 6 more years. Tough old bat she was. Okay. And then when she died, she just quit. You know, one day she's okay, and the next day she just died. You know, you can, that's the way, I'll explain death to you sometime, how it works. And that's the way it works. People of the lowest socioeconomic status suffer excessive stress for two reasons. They experience a greater number of sources of stress, overcrowded housing, neighborhood crime, single parenthood. They have to live in bad neighborhoods where there's a lot of crime. And then, of course, there's a lot of single parenthood in people that are poor. They do not have the financial resources to help them cope with their stress. So what do? Well, they just have to survive, I guess. Immigrants coming into the United States are under pressure to acculturate. There are two theories that purport the immigrant will have less stress. The melting pot theory maintains that the faster they acculturate, the less stress that they will suffer. One of the things that we've discovered about people coming into the United States, and we've been looking at this for hundreds of years, one of the things that we've noticed is that it's easier for a female to acculturate than a male. It's easier for the female. She usually learns a language better than he does, as strange as that is. A lot of times he will go back. He'll go back to where he's from. And she stays in the United States. It's easier for her to acculturate than it is for him to acculturate. Now, we've got a group of individuals in the United States who were brought to the United States, and they had a hard time acculturating. Part of the problem is that the dominant culture in the United States is white. There's a shock for you. Okay. So the closer you look to the people that are dominant in the country, the more likely you'll be acceptable. That's the way it works in the United States. Okay. So we've got a group of people in the United States that look very much different than the white population. I'm not talking about indigenous people. I'm talking about black people, African Americans. Their skin is very, very dark. Their hair is a different texture. Now, the interesting thing about African Americans, and I'm speaking as a white person here, the interesting thing about African Americans is that females are more acceptable than males are. Females are always more acceptable than males are. Males are like rogue wolves or something. So if you go to a place where you're not the same, if you're female, you'll get along better in that population than if you're a male. Males are challenging. It's a challenge to them. They have to make their way in the world far more than females do. As curious as that is, and that's true almost of any place or any group of individuals that you think of. Females are always more acceptable than males are. Back in the day when indigenous peoples were raiding each other, they didn't steal men, they stole women, didn't they? They just killed the men, and they would steal the women. They would kidnap them. Sometimes they would kidnap male children. But if they were going to steal an adult, it was never a male. It was never an adult male. It was always a female. Unless they were looking for warriors. The Shawnee, there's a story about Daniel Boone was captured, and he was adopted into the tribe by the chief because he needed warriors, and he thought he could integrate Daniel Boone into the tribe. And it didn't work. He held him for 18 months. Now, the funny thing about that was, while Daniel Boone was gone, his wife gave birth to a child. Now, that's not so funny, except it was like 14 months after he was captured. Really? 14 months? How does that work? Let me think. How long is gestation? Oh, it's 9 months. Wait a minute. So who was the father? Now, the interesting thing was that when he came back, he had He had this little 3 or 4 month old baby. And he adopted him into his family, and he raised him as if he was his own kid. You know why? The father was his brother. I know, white people, you just never know what they're going to do next. That's the story of Daniel Boone and his son. Now, the interesting thing about that son is that that son stayed with him. He moved from Kentucky to Missouri, and his son stayed with him until he died. That was the son that stayed with him until he died. Most of his other sons died prior to that. But this kid that wasn't actually his, was the one that was the closest to him, as strange as that may seem. Okay, there's a story about Daniel Boone. Okay, so the melting pot tells you that the faster they acculturate, the less stress that they will suffer. So there's always a pressure to acculturate. Of course, with indigenous people, that was assimilation. That's one of the reasons why they threw you guys into boarding schools. They were trying to force assimilate. That's why they cut your hair. They wouldn't allow you to speak your own language. They wouldn't let you wear the clothes that you wore on the reservations or back home, wherever back home was. They forced you to wear their clothes. They forced you to speak English. They forced you to have a haircut that was very much different. Now, why in the world, why is hair so important? Why is hair so important? It seems odd that anybody cares about what your hair looks like, right? But when you're in the military, damn, they line you up every week and they look at your hair to make sure that it's not too long and it's not touching your collar. If you're a female, if you're a male, they're looking at your lips to find out where your mustache comes. And if any hair is on the outside of the vermilion of your lips, this is how weird they are. And they'll get a measurement and they'll measure you. And if your hair is a quarter of an eighth of anything, a micro inch long, then you get in trouble. Why is hair so important? It's forced assimilation. You guys weren't allowed to wear braids. You weren't allowed to have a single braid down your back. The people up north have a scalp lock that they wear. They weren't allowed to do that. They weren't allowed. They had to shave their. They had to all look like Travis. And his new haircut. Yeah, it was that bad. No, I'm just kidding. He hates me now. Okay. Anyway, they were trying to. It's forced assimilation. It's forced assimilation, and of course, the more. The faster that they can force you to assimilate. Not only that, but they forced you to sing hymns and to read the Bible. The reason they wanted you to learn to read was so that you could read the Bible. They wanted you to become a Christian. If you became a Christian, then you wouldn't have the old ideas, the old traditional ideas. They were trying to get that out of your system. They were trying to force assimilation. And oddly, if you read the congressional debate about what they were going to do with the indigenous peoples in the United States, it was the Christians that convinced the War Department not to kill everybody. It looked like everybody, all the indigenous people in the United States were going to be killed. And they said this over and over again. In the 1830s they said it. In the 1840s it looked like they were going to annihilate all of the tribes. Because if you think about what was happening, and I don't know if you've read the history, but if you look at the indigenous tribes east of the Mississippi River, they almost killed them all off. And it looked like that's what was going to happen. As soon as they came west of the Mississippi River, I mean, that was the policy back east. So it looked like that might happen in the West. Really. And this is in the congressional record. You can read it. Every year the Bureau of Indian Affairs had to make a statement to Congress telling them what was the status of American Indians. So you can read this every year. What did he have to say about that? And in most years he was saying it looks like they're all going to die off. It looks like we're not going to have any more American Indians. Any more Indians, they referred to you guys. It looked like that's what was going to happen. And then the church came in and said, no, this isn't right. We need to change things, but we need to Christianize these people. And that's when they came up with the whole plan, sending missionaries out west. And they gave each reservation to a different church. And the church they gave you guys to was the Presbyterian church, is that correct? Wasn't it the Presbyterians? Didn't they come out here first? Yeah. But eventually the Presbyterians got tired of coming out here, so they left. And then the Catholics moved here. Yeah. The bicultural theory states that when they maintain their traditional values and customs, they suffer less stress. In other words, if you can allow people to maintain their own culture, they'll be okay. This is one of the reasons why a lot of Mexicans celebrate the Day of the Dead. This isn't something that anybody else does in the United States. This is why different groups, people from Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, or people from Slovakia, they have their own saints' days, and they will have these festivals. It's in order to maintain their own culture. Because if it were up to everybody in the United States, they want everybody to assimilate. They want them all to be like them. They think that you want to look and act just like they do. You want to have the same haircut. You want to have the same job. They think that you want their jobs, and this is one of the reasons why they don't want immigrants to come across the border, because they think that they're after their money. They want your job. They want to take it away from you, and actually they say that from time to time. Donald Trump has said that in a couple speeches lately. They want to take your jobs. They haven't said anything about taking your women yet, but that's next, I guess. Research shows that the bicultural theory is correct. As long as you can maintain your culture, you're okay. But you have to maintain your culture. Is it time? Travis says. Oh, it is time.
Yeah, it is.
I apologize. I'm
So-
sorry I went over.
Which one is more proven, more likely?
Bicultural.
Bicultural theory. Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know if you see. There used to be a television show called Saturday Morning, something Rock. Education Rock. I don't remember. Anyway, they talked about the melting theory, the melting pot theory. That's what I learned when I was in school back in the '60s. They talked about the melting pot. Oh no, everybody wants to be Americans, you know. And of course they had to purport that because they had just fought World War